Are you ready to hear something uncomfortable? Something you've probably felt deep inside but never had the courage to say out loud. That thing you fear most, rejection, isn't your enemy. In fact, it might be one of the most powerful forces guiding your transformation. And no, this isn't some hollow motivational speech. This is reality. Rejection hurts. Of course it does. It burns like something is being pulled out from within you. But here's what most people don't realize: that pain has a purpose. It reveals. It strips away the layers and exposes what's still asleep inside you. Because rejection isn't really about the person saying no. It's about what within you still hasn't healed. When someone turns you down, they're not condemning your essence. They're reacting to something that maybe even you haven't faced yet. Carl Jung said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. So pause and ask yourself, what exactly is this rejection revealing? Every time someone walks away, something wakes up inside you. An old echo. A feeling that's probably always been there waiting for you to notice. The truth is, rejection isn't random. It shows up when it's time to evolve, when life demands growth. Think about the last time you felt unwanted. That silence. That absence. Now what if I told you that moment held the key to your strength? Because every time you chase acceptance, you lose a piece of your power. You hand over your self-worth to people who were never meant to carry it. But the moment you stop begging for validation, something shifts. A quiet force starts to rise within you. And the world feels it. Because real magnetism comes from self-sufficiency. It's not about being cold, it's about being whole. And the more you try to please, the more you lose your mystery. Because by nature, people pull away from neediness. Power lies in detachment. The moment you realize you don't need to be accepted to have value, you become free. And that's when everything starts to change. That part of you that you hate, that you deny, that you hide, that's where your power lives. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation, the integration of your broken fragments into something whole. Only when you begin that journey do you start to free yourself from the grip of external judgment. Because here's the truth: no one can truly reject you, unless you've already rejected yourself. Think about how many times you've betrayed your own truth for a kind word that never came. How many times you've twisted yourself into someone else's image, only to lose your own reflection. And then, almost cruelly, you were still rejected. Not for who you were, but for who you pretended to be. Here lies the secret most never realize. Real attraction is not manipulation. It's not cheap reverse psychology. It's the raw, magnetic force of someone who has made peace with their darkness, who no longer craves external approval because they've already chosen themselves, without condition. The world is full of people pleasing, begging, chasing scraps of affection. You want to step out of that cycle? Then stop looking. Stop asking. Choose your own path, even if no one understands it, especially if it leads to temporary solitude. Because that is where real power is born. That's the source of magnetic presence. You're not alone because you're weak. You're alone because you've chosen something higher. And people feel that. Even if they don't know how to name it, they sense the weight of someone who isn't desperate to be liked. That's what true attraction looks like, not a performance, but the quiet strength of someone who has stopped needing to be approved. So yes, rejection, far from breaking you, sharpens you. Every no is a mirror. It shows you exactly where you're still fragile, where you're still giving your power away. It invites you to look deeper and ask, why do I crave approval from people who barely know themselves? Why am I handing over my self-worth like it's negotiable? Rejection wakes you up. It forces you to be honest. It reveals the parts of you still waiting to be faced. That's what makes it so painful and so powerful. It doesn't sugarcoat. It doesn't lie. It shows you, with painful clarity, where your weaknesses are, but it also hints at your potential. And that's why you have to stop running from it. Open every rejection like a message from the mirror. Let every no remind you. It's time to stop chasing approval and start building unshakable self-respect. It's not easy. It's not instant. But it's the only path that leads to something real. True attraction doesn't come when you become what others want. It comes when you become what you were always meant to be. Real freedom, real strength, begins the moment you stop depending on other people's opinions, live by your own standards, even if no one else understands them. Because in the end, that's what truly draws people in. Flashes of authenticity, emotional independence, the quiet mystery of someone who knows how to be alone. Not because they're lonely, but because they've discovered their own worth. When you realize that, rejection loses its power. You stop fearing it. You start welcoming it. Always remember this. Rejection is not the end. It's the beginning, the doorway to your actual potential. And now comes the most intriguing part of all this. While you're out there chasing approval, while you're desperate to be accepted by others, you completely overlook the one rejection that truly matters, your rejection of yourself. Ask yourself honestly, how many times have you silenced your own desires just to fit into a mold that was never even yours? Think carefully. The most damaging rejection isn't external, it's internal. It hides in the daily choices you make out of fear. Fear of not being included. Fear of being left behind. That's the rejection that cuts the deepest because it's quiet, subtle, and worst of all, self-inflicted. The darkest truth isn't that someone out there says no to you. It's that you say it to yourself every single day. That your own inner dialogue is more brutal, more limiting, more poisonous than any outside comment. That's the root of the problem. You never learned how to choose yourself first. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's the part of you that craves attention. That needs to be acknowledged, understood, and reintegrated. If you study your life honestly, you'll start to see the patterns. Broken relationships, familiar discomforts, the same emotional wounds repeating in different forms. This is no coincidence. It's your shadow trying to be seen. Every repetition is a message you've refused to hear, an internal call that you've silenced for too long. So let me ask you this. What would happen if, instead of running from rejection, you started listening to it? What would change in your life if you dared to face what you're most afraid to discover within yourself? This is where Jungian psychology becomes revolutionary. To become whole, you must step into your chaos. You must confront your fears, your insecurities, your shame, not to be punished by them, but to finally understand them. Because as long as you keep avoiding that part of yourself, you will continue searching outside for something that will never truly satisfy you. Out there, it's all just distorted mirrors. True attraction doesn't come when you shape yourself into what others want. It comes when you finally become what you were always meant to be. Real freedom, the kind that brings true inner strength, begins the moment you stop depending on the approval of others. You start living by your own values, your own vision, even when no one else understands. And ironically, it's this unapologetic authenticity, this emotional independence, this silent certainty that becomes magnetic. Not the constant noise of those who beg to be noticed, but the quiet confidence of someone who has faced themselves and no longer needs permission to exist. Once you understand that, rejection loses its grip on you. It no longer defines your worth because you've stopped outsourcing that power. Instead of chasing validation, you begin to see rejection for what it truly is: a mirror, a moment that reflects not what others think of you, but how deeply you've disconnected from your own truth. And here's the most overlooked part. While you spend your life running from the disapproval of others, you miss the most dangerous rejection of all, the one you direct at yourself. Think about how many times you've said no to your own dreams. How often you've ignored your desires, reshaped your personality, or softened your voice just to fit in. That's not adaptation. That's abandonment. Not of them, of yourself. And it's silent. It hides in your daily choices, in the way you speak, in the people you chase, in the opportunities you avoid. You reject yourself every time you let fear dictate your path. Not the fear of failure, but the fear of being alone, misunderstood, unloved. That's the rejection that truly paralyzes us. The inner one. And yet it's also the one we have full power to change. Carl Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The shadow, those parts of you that you hide, deny, or judge, they are not your enemies. They are your compass. They show you exactly where you're still broken, where you're still hiding, where you're still afraid to be seen. And if you look closely, you'll see the patterns. Repeating conflicts, familiar pain, the same emotional wounds dressed in different faces. That's not bad luck. That's your shadow knocking. It's asking to be acknowledged, healed, integrated, not avoided. Every rejection you face is a doorway, an invitation to come back to yourself. But instead of walking through it, you build more walls. You distract yourself. You pretend it doesn't hurt. But deep down, you know it does. So the question is this: what would happen if, instead of fearing rejection, you started listening to it? What if every no you received was a signal? Not that you're not enough, but that you're looking in the wrong direction. What if it's not about being accepted by others, but about finally accepting yourself? That's the work Jung was pointing to. That's the path most people avoid. But it's also where everything begins to change. What you're truly seeking isn't found in others. It's hidden within you, buried deep in those shadowed corridors you avoid because you believe they're dangerous. And yes, they are. But only by walking through that darkness can you uncover the true depth of your personality. Only there will you discover who you actually are. Here's the paradox. The more you try to protect yourself from rejection, the more you reject yourself. You want a brutal truth? Most people go their entire lives never meeting themselves, living in layers of masks and projections, afraid that what they might find underneath won't be worthy of love. And that's exactly why they never become truly attractive. They become replicas, diluted versions of what they think others want. They bend, twist, and adjust, constantly chasing approval, molding themselves to please until they're completely disconnected from their essence. This is the path that leads to emotional exhaustion, a never-ending performance that slowly erodes the core of who they are. And here's the hardest part to swallow. Once you finally stop running, once you face the parts of yourself you've avoided, the fear of external rejection begins to lose its power, because you realize that no one's no can wound you deeper than your own denial. That's what real detachment means. It's not apathy. It's not coldness. It's the complete opposite. A deep-rooted clarity that your worth doesn't live in someone else's opinion. That kind of inner independence is rare. It's magnetic. Because while everyone else is begging for attention, a person rooted in themselves becomes the exception. And exceptions draw attention, not because they try, but because they don't need to. Now think about the people you quietly admire, the ones who seem to radiate presence without effort. What do they have in common? They chose themselves, over the noise, over the need to be liked. They've faced their shadows, and they've decided to live by their own standards. That's where their power lies. That's where their quiet pull comes from. They don't chase, they don't perform, they simply are. And because of that, they become captivating. This is where people misunderstand the concept of reverse psychology. It's not a trick. It's not manipulation. It's the natural result of someone who has stopped chasing approval because they've already approved of themselves. These people aren't magnetic because they want to be. They're magnetic because they've made peace with being alone. Their indifference isn't fake. It's freedom. And that freedom is irresistible. Here's the beautiful paradox. The less you need acceptance, the more you receive it. The less you chase, the more you attract. And the real magic? The moment you stop begging for validation, you start allowing life to move toward you. Not because you forced it, but because you've finally aligned yourself with your truth. You become someone no longer defined by external circumstances, but by a deep-rooted connection to yourself. And when you reach that state, when you finally understand that rejection only hurts when you're rejecting yourself, something unexpected begins to unfold. The world starts to gravitate toward you, not because you begged for it, but because it senses something rare, something real, something almost extinct in today's world. It's as if you were searching for the key outside, when all along, it was in your pocket. And now, I want you to imagine something different. What would happen if right now, today, you chose yourself for the very first time in your life? If you let go of the hunger, the expectations, the labels imposed on you since the beginning. If you looked at your reflection without filters, without shame, without asking anyone for permission to simply exist as you are, I promise you, you would find something extraordinary. Beneath the rejection, beneath the longing, your true self is waiting, quietly, patiently, ready to be seen and embraced by the only person who's ever had the power to do so, you. So listen carefully. Don't waste another minute chasing validation. Don't spend another second waiting for people who can't even validate themselves to approve of you. Learn to see rejection for what it really is. A message. A sacred invitation to finally awaken, to step into your internal power, to stop asking for what you already possess. Because once you stop needing external permission, something magical, almost unexplainable, begins to shift. You start attracting exactly what aligns with your truth. The energy around you changes, not because you forced it, but because you no longer fear standing alone. And if you've come this far, maybe you're ready for the deepest question of all. What would you do if you knew, with absolute certainty, that you never needed anyone's approval again? What kind of life would you choose to live then? Because here lies the final mystery I want to leave you with today. Once you overcome the fear of rejection, you never return. You never go back to your previous self. Something irreversible takes place, a quiet revolution inside you. And in that moment, you finally realize what you've always suspected, that you were never incomplete to begin with. You always were whole. You just forgot. Rejection, then, is not a curse. It's your greatest doorway. But will you walk through it? Or will you keep waiting for someone else to choose you first? Rejection is more than just a passage to self-awareness. It's a test of authenticity, one that most people run from their entire lives. And here's one last uncomfortable truth most prefer to ignore. When you're rejected, what hurts the most isn't the other person's opinion. It's the fact that their judgment confirms something you already fear about yourself. That's the real wound. The deep cut. It's not that someone said you weren't enough. It's that, secretly, you already believed them. You've been afraid to confront that hidden thought, that quiet, corrosive voice that whispers, maybe they're right. And that's the real battle. That's the moment where everything can change. Because right there, in the middle of that discomfort, is where the magic begins. Rejection becomes your ally, your mirror, your breakthrough. Most people prefer to hide, to deny, to lie to themselves, because facing the truth always hurts. But denial only prolongs the agony. You want the kind of power that few ever reach? Then look directly into the part of yourself you fear the most. Don't run. Don't look away. Face that dark corner no one else sees, but that you recognize instantly when you're alone, in silence. And now we reach a fascinating paradox. We live in an age obsessed with pretending to be perfect, with hiding rejection, masking pain, and performing success. Social media is saturated with smiling masks, filters, and carefully posed images to conceal the deep insecurity hiding just behind the screen. But ask yourself, what would happen if, instead of hiding your emotional wounds, you embrace them publicly? What if you dared to show the world that yes, you've been rejected. Yes, you've felt fear. Yes, you've doubted yourself. But that despite all of it, you still chose to move forward? Here's the perfect irony. The more you try to hide your vulnerability, the less authentic you appear. People can smell falseness from miles away. What truly moves them isn't perfection. It's raw authenticity, the kind that dares to show scars, bruises, and lessons. So stop treating rejection like it's something shameful. Use it. Wear it as a badge of courage. Because right there in your accepted vulnerabilities lies your greatest power. But let's be clear. This isn't about romanticizing rejection or slipping into the comfort of victimhood. It's not about becoming a martyr. It's about becoming a conscious warrior. And here's where the hidden power lives. When you admit that rejection doesn't break you, you rise emotionally, instantly. Do you know why? Because you finally learned the most essential lesson in life. Your identity can never depend on external applause. Emotional dependency is the fastest route to internal defeat. And make no mistake, I'm not telling you to isolate yourself from the world or become an emotional lone wolf. It's the opposite. It's about learning to connect with others from the strength of someone who no longer seeks approval, but real, meaningful connection. Have you noticed how the most authentic relationships, the deepest, most soulful ones, happen when you're not desperately chasing them? That's a universal law few truly grasp. When you stop chasing, you start attracting. But don't confuse that with passivity. It's the opposite. It's about living with so much passion and presence, so much clarity and inner fire, that you no longer have time or space to obsess over being accepted. You fill your space so completely with your own essence that rejection simply has nowhere left to live. Rejection still exists, of course, but its impact fades because you no longer feed it, no longer depend on it to define who you are. Now let me offer you a mentally uncomfortable exercise. Imagine just for a second that you get everything you've ever wanted. Every dream fulfilled, every goal achieved, every person you've desired saying yes to you. What happens next? Exactly. You'd feel an enormous emptiness, because you'd finally see the truth, that nothing external can ever truly satisfy you. And that truth reveals something powerful. Genuine fulfillment never came from out there. It was always waiting inside of you. What completes you was never in another person, or in a place, or in someone's approval, but in your own inner recognition. And here comes the final revelation. If everything you've been chasing is already within you, why do you keep waiting for the outside world to validate you? Because you're afraid. Afraid of discovering that it all depends on you, and only you. It's easier to blame rejection. It's more comfortable to point fingers at others than it is to admit the terrifying truth. You are the sole author of your emotional reality. But hidden within that fear is the key to your greatest strength. When you finally understand that no one is coming to rescue you emotionally, you stop looking outward for something only you can give to yourself. So, what's the final secret of rejection psychology? That only when you accept that you don't need anything external to feel whole, you begin to authentically attract everything you deserve. You stop attracting out of desperation and start attracting out of choice. And that single shift in mindset transforms everything. You no longer walk through life with your hands outstretched, begging to be seen. You move with confidence, with quiet strength, with an unshakable presence, because you know your worth never depended on what someone else thought of you. And now, let me tell you something that almost no one dares to say this clearly. Life does not reward those who chase approval. It rewards those who dare to live authentically, even if they don't fit in, especially if they don't fit in. The final irony is that society ultimately ends up rewarding those who dare to ignore its rules. The most magnetic people, the ones who leave an impression that lingers, aren't those constantly seeking attention. They're the ones who've completely abandoned the need for external validation. That is power. That is pure magnetism. So ask yourself honestly, every time you feel the sting of rejection, maybe what you're really feeling isn't someone else's no, but the echo of your own silence, the consequence of not having chosen yourself yet. Rejection is a clear signal that you're still chasing something outside that can only ever be found within. And maybe, just maybe, that pain that follows you around isn't because they didn't choose you. It's because you still haven't. Are you ready for that challenge? Do you have the courage to confront your own shadow, to stop running and start walking inward? Because in the end, there's only one rejection no one truly recovers from: living an entire life without ever choosing yourself. And if you've made it this far, if every word resonated, even the uncomfortable ones, then maybe, without realizing it, you've already begun. Maybe the decision is already happening. And if it is, let that be known. Say it out loud, or write it somewhere only you will see. I choose myself, even when no one else does. Because that single sentence might mark the exact moment rejection stopped defining you and started refining you.